All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 2 showdown stream for the Wyndham Championship. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure with a look at how to play tomorrow's slate, a weather report, also ownership and a shots gained report for tomorrow to get you ready for all of your action, and of course to answer any questions that you've got for me in chat. So if there's anything that you're curious about, that could be specific players that you want us to deep dive. We'll go through all the shots gained metrics from today, or even some process-based questions from the showdown side of things. Don't be shy at all to go ahead and let me know. But outside of that, I need you guys to smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and let's get after it for Friday's slate. And you got Go Collect down there, sites as well, and Colin, who seems to be a really big Damon fan, can't blame you. He had himself a day. 61 is always a good round at Sedgefield. And yeah, RIP that nap chalk. I saw somebody saying that he was withdrawing. Not sure if there's truth to that, but even if he didn't, +4, that is likely getting on the jet and going home. But we got Joseph in the chat as well. Hopefully you're having a fantastic evening, and let's get this thing started. So first and foremost, we'd like to take a look at the round 1 scoring average, which did favor the morning side of things, and it's hovering around a 0.8 shot difference between the two waves, which is significant when you take a look at the scoring. And in fact, if we take a look at the top scores and the wave that they played in, vast majority of them were on the AM side. So Damon, Norn, also Rye with that -7 or better. Other than a Hubbard, a Sunjay M, and then a Meister at -5, most of the players were on the right side of the draw. And it's worth noting that because there wasn't a massive difference in the wind. In fact, if we go up to the observed weather at the top, that's what they do here on Data Golf, is they show you what ended up happening in actuality. You can see that the winds were a little bit higher in the afternoon, but they were 3 to 6, even 7, 8 miles an hour for a lot of the morning. Afternoon, it was the same kind of thing to this point. So it was more so the golf course drying up that caused that difference. And though tomorrow's forecast, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, you can kind of see it on Data Golf towards the bottom, looks pretty flat. That's what we had today, and it still played to a pretty big difference. So without even the weather forecast in hand, I would say that the AM side would get the better side of the draw, and that's what the golf course getting a little firmer and faster as the day goes on. Now, when we add the weather on top of it, I think it makes it maybe a slightly more compelling reason to go towards your AM wave players, because the winds does look pretty flat like it was for round 1, but there's some nasty stuff coming in late. So I think it's going to affect the guys going off late in the PM wave more so than your early guys, because your first few groups off in today's in the PM wave, they finished by about 6 p.m. local time, so right before this nasty storm comes through. But it goes from about 8 miles an hour of sustained wind to closer to 20 and 30 mile an hour wind gusts for the last few hours of the day. So depending on how the pace of play is looking, your last hour and a half of tee times could be getting screwed with that storm coming through. Now, anytime we see this kind of precipitation, there's a chance for a delay. If a delay happens, it probably takes away that sort of a thing. But if they have to play through a storm towards the end of play, that would add on top of that 0.7, 0.8 shot advantage. So I do see the AM wave getting the better side of the draw. I guess it depends on the timing on that storm, on how big that edge is going to be. It's big enough for me to slightly favor that side in my lineups, but I'm not going to be completely stacking the AM wave players. There are still going to be some PM wave guys that are sneaking their way into my pool. It's not even going to be that much of a bias. Like, I was building my player pool before I got on here. We're still having play finish up, so my projections aren't quite finalized, but I was trying to get an idea of exactly where my exposure was going. And I think it was like 55 or 60% of players that I had on the AM side of things, but still 40% towards the wrong side of it, which the reason for that is it was only a 0.8 shot difference today. You're still going to get guys that go off from the wrong side of tee time. So for example, your Hubbards, your Sunjays, your Meisters, your Castillos, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the nutted performances, and that was for round one. This is an extreme example of a weather edge, in my opinion, because a lot of times when we check on this, there are maybe like 4 or 5, even 6 guys in the top 10, 12 scores that are from the wrong side of the tee times. Tomorrow, I don't think you have to fully stack the AM side of things, but if you're playing more than 20 lineups, I would say, heck, even more than like 5 or 6 lineups, you probably want to have a few that are only playing only AM wave players. So, for example, I'm looking at about 50 lineups in the large field GPPs tomorrow. Then I'll have some single entry exposure on top of that. My single entry, I might go full 6-0 AM wave. That's, something that I'm highly considering. And then with my 50 max exposure, I might take half of them. So 25 of those lineups, and then only stack it towards the AM side of things. So I think it's the kind of edge where you want to have lineups there in case the edge exists. But let's say that the storm doesn't come through, or maybe that they have to take the players off the golf course and then finish up the next morning. That might lead to a scenario where we do get like a bunch of those guys popping in the top 5 or 6 rounds from the wrong side of tee times, and you wouldn't want the full stack in that situation. So I'm kind of just covering all my bases with the uncertainty of that forecast. And if we take a look at some of the other ones on here, like for example, this HRDPS looks pretty flat, but they also have that storm coming through. This NEM model also looks pretty flat without the storm in the afternoon. You have this Medio Blue model, which calls for a very similar kind of forecast. Icon model, also some storms in the morning. Let's hope that one doesn't come true, because we want these guys to finish up play. This one looks very similar to the HRRR models. And then the ECM model kind of looks like this icon. So let's hope the ECM and icon models are not the most accurate, because if so, there's a chance that play would go into Saturday. And I guess it's worth at least talking about that, because we have 2 of the 6 or so models that we're looking at here that are giving us the information. I guess the 7 now, they've added on to it over the years on windy.com. If there's a delay in the morning too, and a delay in the afternoon, I guess we want to look at Saturday at that point. So let's go to NEM. We'll also look at the GFS for Saturday, as those are usually my go-to models when we're more than, let's say, 12 hours out. So NEM model looks pretty windy Saturday morning. Let's go to the GFS as well. GFS, not super windy like you had on that NEM, but windier than what we had for the first few days. So I would say that if there's a delay, and let's say there's 2 delays, right? A morning and an afternoon delay, which I just hope that doesn't happen. That would completely throw off the rhythm of this golf tournament. But if that were to happen, that would favor the AM guys even more, in my opinion. So it's a funky weather slate, in my opinion, one where the AM side, I don't want to say no matter what, but I mean, from what we've said so far and the different models that we've looked through, it pretty much looks like the AM side should be getting an advantage. The question mark is just how big that advantage is going to be. So keep an eye on these weather reports, especially that storming in the afternoon, and the timing of when it's going to come through. Next thing we'll go through would be the ownership, which, because play is finishing up, we don't have that quite finalized, but we know the ownership is going to congregate towards the top end of the board. And the people that played well today are always going to get a little bit of extra steam. And it's not only from your casuals, but PGA DFS players in general love themselves somebody that's in good form. And, if you take a look at the chalk this week, there were some course history guys that were getting steam, but also a lot of your informed players that were well higher than the ownership than people expected. In fact, like a Jake Knapp, for example, who, again, we're not sure if he withdrew or not. I saw that rumor throughout there. We'll have to see if that's true or whatnot. He was a really good form guy that a lot of people were using this week. So people love themselves some form. And what you saw with Jake Knapp is that it's not always the safest prospect. Golf is extremely variant. It is, in fact, maybe the most chaotic sport that we have to project in all of the big PGA DFS, all of the big sports out there, not just PGA, all of the big sports is probably the hardest to predict. And because of that, even the best projecting plays, like a Jake Knapp, for example, who even in my projections was popping quite well this week, doesn't always get there. So for round 2 showdown, these guys that are getting all the extra attention in the large field contests, oftentimes are really good spots to fade and to take a stance against the rest of the field. Now, does that mean I'm fading all of the top 5, top 10? No, that is not the case. Round 4 showdown, we do have placement points in play, but it is worth noting that for a round 2 and a round 3 showdown slate, that there's no incentive to taking these guys in the top 5, top 10 other than the fact that they're in solid form, which does matter. You should be giving those players a little bit of a bump up in your process, but then you have to weigh that against the potential ownership that you're getting on these players. So just because we don't have all of the projections finalized quite yet, do need all of the scores to come through for my algorithm to be able to run its thing. But I do have an idea of who the chalkiest guys on each range should be. I was going through it, kind of getting an idea for it before I run my final sets. In the 9K, 10K range, it's looking like Ben Griffin, maybe Keegan Bradley. I think one of those two is likely going to be the highest owned in the 10K range. 9K range, we're looking at Aaron Rai as most likely your highest owned player. In the 8K range, so going down a little bit further, it's looking like a Siwoo Kim, maybe a Sungjae Im at $8,000. He had that late run towards the end score-wise, so that might get him a little bit more steam than what I currently have him at. Those two guys going to get steam in that range. Coincidentally, all those players, by the way, are guys that had good rounds. I'd have to say it's probably going to be Sungjae that's higher round than Siwoo, just because Sungjae has such a better final score than Siwoo. Siwoo kind of fell off towards the end. I know he has the good course history and good form. He was also chalk for main slate, but Sungjae, people love themselves a -7, so he'll likely be the most popular there. Top end of the 7K range, so we'll do a top and a bottom end of the 7K range. Top end, it looks like Matt Wallace probably getting the most steam, and then bottom end of the 7K range, it's looking like an Alex Noren. So let me get a sip of my coffee here. Mouth getting a little bit dry. In the 6K range, so the very bottom end of the board, there's not really that much chalk, I would say. The quote-unquote highest owned player looks like maybe a William Mao. Could be actually Vince Whaley at a little bit over 5% at $6,900. But outside of like 3-4 guys that have gone that 4 to 5% range, most of the 6K range, you're looking at 1 to maybe 2.5%, 3% at the very most on players. And I guess for the bottom end of the 6K range, guys, there's always a few that get attention after their round one. But Joel Damon, I know we already had a fan in chats that was talking about his round. He's a quote-unquote chalk towards the bottom end of the board. But I guess it's worth noting that I've got Joel Damon at about 2% projected ownership. That's what chalk is in the 6K range. Chalk up top is a completely different scenario. The reason why a 2%er in the 6K range would be classified as chalk is we've got guys around him that are 0.1% owned, quite literally. Like in Isaiah Salinda, I've got 0.1% owned. In fact, I'm using Salinda as a short game regression candidate for tomorrow's round. So that's another reason I wanted to point him out in particular. But a David Skins is 0.3% owned, right around him in the pricing. Hint, might be using him as well for the very same reason. But Joel Damon is 5-6 times, even almost 17 times the ownership of an Isaiah Salinda. So when you look at it that way, that's when it's such a big difference in the ownership that you'd classify a player as chalk. Whereas those other players that we were talking about towards the top end of the board, it's closer to 20 or 15% that I'd classify as chalk. So chalk is always relative, but the higher up the leaderboard that these players are, the more steam that they're going to be getting compared to the players around them. So we know that ahead of time. It's oftentimes pretty predictable with the ownership for Showdown for that reason. There's still some variance involved with pricing. People love themselves a guy that's too cheap as well. So that's another way where a player will get steamed up. And then raw projections too. Somebody that was projecting well heading into the week. Any good projection system is going to have some sort of correlation between their main slate projections and their round 2 showdown. Just because your raw scoring for a main slate, just one day's sample size should not change that projection that much. Now you've got to account for it and make it count for a round 2 showdown slate. You add the weather edge on top of that, but projection also boosts up ownership in cases, which the projection side is a little bit harder to talk about on a live stream here. It's very nuanced. It's almost on a player by player basis where you have to handle that. But the leaderboard stuff, you can see plain as day, right? The guys in the top 5, top 10 are getting that steam. And then also the players that are too cheap. And I guess to go through the pricing, I'll go through that real quickly before we start talking about shots gained metrics and what we're using to build our player pool. But players that got a price decrease for Showdown, Siwoo Kim at $8,700. That's extremely affordable. So that's part of the reason why I thought he might be one of the higher owned guys in that 8K range. Maybe Sungjae just gets slightly higher owned than him, but I think that's why he's going to stay competitive, as he's way too cheap in my opinion. But let's keep going through this. So like a Matt Wallace at $7,800, like that feels way too cheap. A Christian Bezainhood at $7,500, like he was chalk. He played well. He's projecting through the roof at that sort of number. So he'll probably be pretty popular too. Guys like, let's see, anyone else really standing out? Maybe an Echeverria. He's a guy that's probably way too cheap for the kind of projection that he brings to the field. Those are a few of the guys that are going to be getting steam for round number 2 showdown. So not to say that you have to fade every single one of them, but if you're going to play somebody that's average to above average ownership, or especially the above average ownership guys, love them. Commit to them. Make sure you're getting 2x the field leverage, and it's totally fine taking a player with that ownership. So let's go through the shots gained metrics. So now that we've talked through ownership, we have an idea of the weather as well. Let's talk about the kind of stats that you look for in your players to actually throw them into your lineup. So we're going to start with the ball striking stats, the shots gained ball striking tab, and this is combining off the tee and approach play. So it's the 2 most important categories. I would say the most consistent categories that we have from round to round. And these players, it's not to say that they're all 100% going to go out there and repeat it the next day, but they're some of the players that have the best chance to do so. And if you're a golf handicapper, you take a look at the outright betting odds for any given week. The players that are coming in with the best ball striking form are usually towards the top end of those odds. And that's for a rhyme and reason, right? There's a good reasoning behind that, a good theory for why that's the case. And it's because your golf swing, how you're actually swinging the club, is something that you can control for the most part. These tour players are perfectionists. That's what they work on. They work on getting to the right positions in their golf swing. And when you get into a rhythm with your golf swing, that's something that you can sustain not only for a round or two, but over an entire event, almost for an entire month or two on the PGA Tour. It's why we see players go on a hot run. And every once in a while, it's a hot putter that'll carry somebody for a sustained stretch like that. But when you think of Scotty Scheffler, your Tiger Woods, the players that have had greatness for long periods of times, it's because they're the best ball strikers that you have in the world. And yeah, getting hot with the putter is necessary to actually win a tour event. But I'm talking about just being an above average play, being a solid showdown play projection wise. The ball striking stats is what you want to lean into here. So that's why we take a look at these 2 categories a little bit more than some of the rest of them. And number 1 would be Max Homa in that category. He gained over 4 strokes ball striking today. Chris Kirk, he gained over 4 strokes in that category as well. Garrick Higo, Aaron Rye, who's last year's champion. So he'd be a course history guy on top of the ball striking looking good. But a Cam Young, Manicero, Damon, really the entire top end of the board gets a significant boost. But just like the top end of the leaderboard gets a little bit of extra steam, you're not going to be the only one that looks at the ball striking stats. So some of these players will be getting an artificial bump up in ownership, especially if they're towards the top end of the board as well. So for example, an Aaron Rye, Cam Young are going to be extremely popular for next slate. In fact, Cam Young, now that he's at -7, now that I think about it, he might even be one of the chalkier guys towards that portion of the board as well. So it goes hand in hand. Even these T19s probably going to be pretty popular because they're towards the top end of the board and they have those ball striking stats. But the players that maybe aren't the top 5, top 10 in the category should still be given some looks as well. So if we scroll down just a little bit more, we get into the Seabez range where you've got Alex Smalley, Meissner, Ford, Ben Coles that gained over 2.5 strokes ball striking. Even your Matt Wallace's, your Rico Hoey's, your Lee Hodges, etc. These players are still hitting the ball beautifully. Maybe not quite as well as the guys that had some of the best rounds of the day, but close enough. And, if you can comb through the shots gained metrics, we're going to talk about the short game in a second and kind of what we're looking for over there. But if you can add up these shots gained metrics with another category, whether that be course history, we're going to talk about that later too, high upside player, a player that makes a whole bunch of birdies, that could be a player to consider a little bit further down the board here. So to point out a few other ones that were kind of catching my eye, Pearson Cutie hit the ball well today, but his short game held him back. More on that in just a minute. Chesson Hadley, same kind of stat profile, 2.5 shots gained to ball striking, but lost over 2 strokes in the short game categories. There's David Skinsey, gained over 2 strokes ball striking, but lost 4.3 strokes putting. That's hard to believe that that's going to happen in back-to-back days. These players are also worthy of that consideration. And because they're not at the top end of the ball striking list, they're not going to be seeing as big of an artificial bump. But, an Akshay Bhatia, he'll probably still be chalky because he's towards the top end of the board and he hit the ball well. It's more so the diamonds in the rough, the players that aren't going to be getting that steam that are my favorites to throw in for round 2 showdown, because we can talk about the shots gained metrics all we want, building the perfect player pool. There's always a lot that can be said about that. You're always trying to fine tune the process for finding the right plays. I would say the far more important aspect for Showdown, though, the part that's really non-negotiable for me, any round 2, round 3 Showdown slate, is leaning into the game theory. Because, I mean, I led off with it. This is the hardest to predict sport that we have of all the major sports. And trying to pretend like we know who's going to have all the nuke rounds tomorrow would be lying to ourselves. Nobody knows who's going to have those nuke rounds. We can really make our best assumptions, our best guesses at the players that are going to do so. So if all these guys are getting all the ownership, there's players towards the top end of the board, top 10, top 20, that let's say are 2-3 times the ownership on average as all the rest of the plays, you just automatically by default want to fade most of those players towards the top. So that's the beauty of scrolling down on that ball striking list a bit, is that you can get to some of those players, the ones that aren't getting that steam where you can play that game theory edge, yet still play the shots gained edge. Still try and find the players with the best chance to succeed the next day. In my opinion, you need to find the right balance between finding the right plays and then not getting to the ones that everyone's going to be on to find the most success for your round 2, round 3 Showdown slate. So that's the ball striking stats. Let's go to the short game next. So let's sort it by the really big gainers in this category. You might think that this is a good thing, just like we have at the ball striking stats, but it's a little bit sketchier when we have the putting and around the green. So around the green and putting, if you add those two categories together, that would be shots gained short game. That's a searchable stat on a lot of golf databases. And the reason why you lump those two together is that they're the luck side of golf. There are a lot of putts where players expect them to go in. They hit the perfect line, hits a rock and goes offline, and they end up missing the putts. There are some times where they pull the putts. They should have a 0% make rate if they're not hitting their line. And then for whatever reason, it hits a spike mark, it hits the grain the wrong way, and ends up breaking in an unexpected direction. There is so much variance, so much that you just can't control on and around the greens. I mean, you'll hear it from players all the time after their rounds, especially if they had a solid round, but not a great round. They'll always say, like, I hit the ball well, but I couldn't get anything to drop. Sometimes it's out of these players' control at all. I mean, the best putters in the world do gain consistently. So there's still skill when it comes to the short game stats. But if we're looking at the extreme examples, the guys that either gained a whole bunch to the category or lost a whole bunch in the category, there's usually a lot of movement with those players. And what I mean by that, so with these guys that gained a whole bunch in the dark green with the putter, it is extremely hard to believe that all of these guys are going to do it the next day. In fact, I'd be willing to bet you every cent in my pocket that of these guys that gained over 2.5 strokes ball striking, that all of them don't do it again. Now, that's not like I'm going out there on a limb or anything like that, but the point being that the ball strikers, the guys that were in the top 10, top 15 in that category, are a lot more likely to repeat that performance than what you have on the right side over here. So, a Chandler Phillips who lost ball striking, in fact, lost 1.2 strokes ball striking, but gained 4.5 putting. That's a bit of a tough scene for me. Not so much somebody that I could really see myself getting back to. And Aaron Baddeley here that lost 2.6 strokes, almost 2.7 strokes with the ball striking, but gained 4.4 putting. That's a bit of a tough scene as well. And, I hate to point out my guy Jordan Spieth here because I love the start to this week. That -5 today was beautiful, but 4 shots gained putting, it feels like it's got to be the ball striking that does it for him in round number 2. So these players oftentimes would be fades for me in my process, especially if the ball striking stats weren't up to par. Now, a Joel Damon, he hit the ball beautifully today as well. So maybe it's not as big a deal, but especially for these guys that lost ball striking, like a Thorbjorn Olesen, for example, that lost about 1.7 strokes in the ball striking categories, that's something that's really tough to overlook. And it's not just the putting stats, but also around the green. These guys that gained 1.5 to 2.5 strokes in that category are not automatic fades, but they are fades if the ball striking wasn't up to snuff either. So, for example, like an Adam Svensson, a few other guys on here, like, I guess there's not that many great examples. Most of these guys were about a neutral between the two categories, but I suppose like a Keegan who lost the 2 strokes approach, it's certainly not a positive to see this kind of stat profile. And, I guess I need to catch what I just said a second ago where I said like they're automatic fades, like people I won't use. That's not necessarily true. I just want to, correct what I said right there. A lot of times they're going to be fades for me, but it depends on the ownership. If it's an or he could candidate that's going to be sub 5% owned, sub 2% owned towards the bottom end of the board, there are time and places to make that sort of a pivot and realize that it's only an 18-hole sample size that we're looking at here, and for anyone that maybe hasn't realized that at this point, right, for round 2 showdown, it's like completely changing your strategy after the first quarter of an NFL game. I know there's a lot of NFL games where in the first quarter, maybe a defense scores a touchdown, and the optimal captain on a showdown slate is like the Dallas Cowboys defense, like it has been for like 3 games the last 2 years. A lot of people tilted after the first quarter when that's the case, especially when they have like CeeDee Lamb lineups, right? Maybe running back captain lineups on the other side. You're tilted then, but the plus EV move after the first quarter in that game wouldn't be to completely change your lineup construction, because you still got 3 quarters for that to happen. Don't do that too much on these sort of slates. So, and the reason why I mentioned that here is, the shots gained metrics are part of the puzzle, but if you're looking at somebody that is completely overlooked, nobody's playing them for tomorrow, the shots gained metrics almost don't matter at that point. At that point, we're starting to ask ourselves different questions, like almost like their rounds 1 can be excused if they're going to be super low owned. And that's when we start talking about, are they a good course history guy? Have they played well this golf course before? Are they a player that's aggressive, that makes a whole lot of birdies? I'll remind you, if you guys aren't familiar with the showdown scoring, maybe you're newer to the slate and whatnot, there's no placement points, and it's all based on your birdie production. The guys that are getting to like 50, maybe 55 points tomorrow that are going to be close to optimal plays, vast majority of those points, when you look at the point breakdown, are going to be with the birdies that they're posting. So, when we're looking at the guys that are super low owned that maybe struggled, if they're going to find your way into the player pool, it's because of some other reason that you're getting onto those. You always need the or he coulds. You always need those lower owned plays to offset any chalk that you're playing. So these shots gained metrics are a tool that you can use to your advantage, but they're just catch yourselves if you're using them as the end all be all, because especially after only 18 holes, they should not be used like they're the gospel. They're again, a tool, but one that you don't want to abuse. If you go too far with it, you'll be on all the same plays as everyone else. And then we want to take a look at some of the short game losers. So we'll talk about the course history and the high upside plays after this as well, because that's, like I said, where you get to a lot of these lower owned options. But you can do the same thing with the short game stats as well. So the guys that lost a whole bunch to the field, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen in back-to-back days. So, for example, Bud Colley, I'm so glad he made 5 birdies. I had an over 4 birdie line on him today. So he made me sweat it out. That's for damn sure. But even with this shitty putting day, he did make those 5 birdies or better. But imagine how good he hit the ball if he lost 6 strokes putting and he still managed to make 5 birdies or better. He was hitting dart after dart. He was missing 3-foot putt after 3-foot putt. And by the end, he started to get a little bit better on the greens. But that front 9, I think he lost like 5.5 strokes putting. He had just set himself so far behind the 8 ball that there was no chance that he was going to shoot something under par. So Bud Colley could be somebody that you take and just hope that he doesn't lose those 6 strokes again. Even just being a neutral would be a massive improvement. Of course, with anything into the positive being just a 9-day difference from round 1 to round 2. David Skins, I'm using him as a bounce back candidate. I mentioned Isaiah Salinda before as well. You guys already know that I'm playing both of those guys, and you can see why. Their ball striking stats were decent. Salinda actually gave away a few towards the end. Look at that. He went bogey, par, so it's kind of unfortunate. His ball striking stats when I was first looking at him were into the positive over his first, 14, 15 holes. But even then, 5 shots gained into the negative there feels like something that's not likely to happen in back-to-back days. A Skins losing over 4 strokes on the greens, he's usually much, much better than that. And you could extend that to a Nikolai Højgaard. He gained ball striking, but lost over 4 strokes in the short game. Even some of these guys like a Preston Cole. I mean, I'm not going to use him. I don't even know who the hell he is, if I'm being completely honest with you. But he lost like 4.7 strokes short game or 4.5 strokes short game. That's not going to happen in back-to-back days most times. So, but I would say if it is going to happen to someone in back-to-back days, it's on somebody that we've never heard of before. So yeah, I guess I brought up his picture here to see what the hell he looked like. Who the hell is that dude? Somebody in chat's got to know who this guy is. Maybe he's like a Corn Ferry Tour popper. Let's see. Has he ever played on tour before? I don't think so. He played in Myrtle Beach this year, shot +9 and missed the cut. And he played at last year's PGA Championship. Good for him. I guess he qualified somehow to get into that event. But yeah, if somebody's going to lose the 4-stroke short game, maybe it's that sort of player. But these legit PGA Tour pros, like a Kevin Yu, who lost 3 strokes putting, that's something that you'd expect to get a little bit better. Ben Cole's the same thing. He'd be another short game regression candidate. A Pearson Cootie here, he lost 2.8 strokes in that category as well. And the thing that makes these 3 players different than some of the other ones that lost a whole bunch putting is the ball striking stats are a whole lot better, right? There's a lot of red towards the top, especially with like these few players, like Preston Cole and Kaito Unishi. Kaito, by the way, withdrew, so definitely don't play him. But you can see positive. It went to the positive with those 3 players. So don't sleep on those sort of guys. And Nate Lashley withdrew as well, I guess. I didn't realize that. He was looking like a good short game regression candidate as well. So that's, I guess, a little bit disappointing that we're not going to have him to choose from. But consider some of those other options that we pointed out on there too. So that's how we use the shots gain metrics to our advantage. But don't sleep on some of the other ways that you could be rounding out your player pool as well. Whether it's the course history, the high upside players that I was mentioning before, or anything that you're using in your personal process. Because, I give you guys this insight into what I do for any given slate. Not to say that you have to 100% copy and paste it and use it yourself, right? That's not the idea with that, but it's to give you some perspective and, an idea of what a pro player is doing for any given slate. So you can take bits and pieces and implement it on your own and add on top of it for the things that you're using and that you found some success with. So for example, I know a lot of people swear by the round by round historical stats, like the people that play well on Fridays, that play well on Saturdays, Sundays, et cetera, et cetera. I'm somebody that exclusively only uses that on Sundays. I'm not a believer in the round 1 through 3 stuff. I don't think people wake up on a certain day and just think that they're going to play better golf. I do think, though, that on Sundays when you're in contention and if you've made the cut and your paycheck is on the line that day, that pressure can make people play, pressure makes diamonds at times, or pressure ends up making it crumble and disintegrate, right? It does one of 2 things to people. I think that Sunday stuff with the round 4 historical is really good, but some people swear. I mean, some people, it's like their main process, right? For rounds 2 and 3 is to look at that kind of thing. If that's the case, then by all means, right? Use that to find some of your lower owned plays. You shouldn't only be using shots gain metrics to find who you're going to be using for the next day. Oftentimes I'll use putting stats. I'll try and find guys that are good on the putting surface of the week. This time around, by the way, it's Bermuda grass. So if you go to any golf database and you sort it by Bermuda grass putting stats, that could be another way to find plays. You could look at, par 4 scoring. I mean, I'm just spitballing at this point, trying to give you guys ideas on top of what I typically do for any slate, but it's a par 70. You've got the 2 extra par 4s. I've seen worse things to lean into, and I'm kind of grasping at straws at that point. I can't really think of a million other things I would incorporate myself, or else I would probably have them in my pool. But sometimes it's a windy day and we play guys that are really good in the wind. Sometimes it's going to be super soft conditions, and I want players that are specifically really good iron players, because when conditions are soft, I want people that are going to go pin hunting. There's a million different reasons that you could use for getting onto players. The key is, and this is really the one non-negotiable I'd say in your process, guys, is have a process for getting onto your plays, right? Don't just be throwing guys into lineups for any given reason. Know why you're getting to your plays, not only so you can clean up your player pool, take out some of the junk, the guys that maybe you were just playing for the hell of it, but also so you can learn from it. When you know why you're getting to people, and better yet, if you can write down why you're playing people, I think that is the absolute nuts that you can get to. In fact, I just want to show you guys, this is what I do in my process. And I'm somebody that does this for every single slate that I play. I play it the same way here. I write down the reason for every single player that I'm getting to. They're either a ball striking popper. This is for round 2 and 3 showdown. Round 4 showdown, I added placement points on top of this. But they're either a ball striking popper, a short game regression candidate, a high upside player, or a course history player. If they're not one of those 4 things, they are not in my player pool for the next day. There's no one in there that's just in there for ownership reasons. And the reason for that, especially round 2 showdown, is got 154 players now after the 2 withdrawals to choose from. There's going to be plenty of low-owned players. In fact, more low-owned players than you could possibly choose from. So between the low-owned guys that I'm trying to play for tomorrow, I'm going to have a rhyme and reason for getting to those sort of guys. So that's what I do. If somebody like myself, that I have pretty good recall memory, do this professionally, I pay attention to this way more than most people watching this probably do, which is fair to say, right? That's what I do for my job. You guys have work, you guys have obligations to do, so I wouldn't expect you to be looking at it as much. If even I have to write down why I'm playing players to try and learn from it afterwards, somebody that's newer to this, right, should especially be doing so. And I'm not saying that as a negative and whatnot, but I'm saying that because I'm always trying to get make myself better. I'm always trying to improve my personal process. If you're new, then you for sure, right, should be trying to improve your process. So consider that aspect. Again, it doesn't have to be the same 4 things that I'm using to get onto plays, but whatever you use to find your player pool, delineate that and give yourself an idea of why you're playing who you are. Let's go through the shots gained metrics now, any of your questions that you've got in the chat. So any player pool deep dives that we didn't already go through, feel free to let me know. And then afterwards, we're going to build a lineup and tie it all together. So it's a catch up on chat, see exactly where we left off. We got C. Floyd, Steve down there as well. And yeah, like my guy Joe said, smash the like button if you guys haven't already. And I won't call you guys slapdicks like he did, but if you don't hit the like button, you might be a little bit of one. We got C. Floyd there, Colin as well. He said that Ben Griffin said that the winds were switching on him in the afternoon. Yeah, players say that sometimes. I don't know if there's that much truth to it, though. It feels like a little bit of an excuse for some of those guys. It looked like it was firming up to me at least, but hey, he's a professional golfer, so take what he says seriously, right? He's got a lot of knowledge on the topic. What's going on, Nick? Better to have you late than never. And he says, as always, thanks for the hard work. I appreciate you, my man. We got you're worried sick about Nate Lashley. Yeah, looks like he's out of there. Stinks because he was setting up well for the next day. We're looking at a Higo 1 through 10. So let's do that. Good old Garrick Higo. So he gained ball striking today. I knew that. I was looking at that before, and he lost in the short game category. So stat wise, again, we're going to add that on top because I'm not talking about in general with this rating. Stat wise, 9 out of 10. Like literally, this is the exact stat profile that you're looking for. Now, you've got to consider that it's Garrick Higo. Got to remember who we're dealing with, an extremely, extremely volatile player, not somebody that typically keeps it together for all 4 rounds. But his stat profile today was as good as it could possibly get. So yeah, stat profile 9 out of 10 when you kind of normalize it for him as a play. And I'm not talking crap on the guy because, hey, I bet him outright at the Palmetto when he first won, and it was like his second ever tournament. So I'm well into the positive, probably forever on Higo because of that. He's that ROI is never going to go away on him. But even then, he hasn't done. I guess he won that second time in Puerto Rico as an alternate field event, but I just kind of shrugged my shoulders at guys winning alternate field events. It really doesn't mean that much to me. It's like, do we think that Ryan Gerard's a world killer now after winning at that alternate field event a couple weeks ago? Probably not, right? So all the respect to my guy Garrick, but remember that with him too, right? Like he's got a good, really, really good stat profile, but he's still Garrick Higo, unfortunately. He said he got a rough start to kick in the nuts, eh? You got 3 more rounds to get after it. Just like I was saying with the NFL analogy before, right? If you're not in first place after the first quarter, it's probably a good thing for that because the lineups that are winning after 15 minutes of an NFL slate hardly ever hold on. Same thing in golf with all the variance, all the chaos that we have in this sport. You almost don't want to be in first place. In fact, I've had more GPP wins starting outside of the top 50 heading into Sunday than I've had starting in the top 5 heading into Sunday. So if that tells you the variance right there. What's going on? Akeem, he says, what does short game regression look like? The short game regression looks like Garrick Higo. So let's go back to that stat profile, which again, 9 out of 10 stat profile here. This is short game regression. Somebody that lost in these 2 categories, that's normally a little bit better. It's not like Garrick Higo is like an elite tier short game player, but even for guys that suck short game, you're only losing like a half a stroke to maybe 0.75 strokes gained per round. Let's assume the worst case scenario, which is not the truth. Garrick's about an average short game player between the putting and the around the green. But let's say that he was somebody that was losing like a half a stroke per round. That 2.5 strokes that he lost today, a little bit over that, is still something that we would expect to regress to the mean. And you don't want to be looking for those short game regression candidates with just the short game. You want to marry that up with solid ball striking stats. So that's why Garrick Higo would be an example of a short game regression candidate, because he hit the ball solid, just has to be about a neutral in those 2 categories, and he could shoot something like -5, -6. And there were a few others that kind of stood out, like the Pearson Cooties of the world. Let's go to the around the green ones, because is that where we had some really good ones? Yeah, like a Matt Wallace would make sense for that. Nicholas Norgard Muller as well would be a short game regression candidate. That's what I mean when I'm talking about that. What's going on? Rushing? Can we deep dive Nikolai? We for sure can. So his short game was horrendous today. I mean, especially the putter, he lost 4 strokes on the greens, but he gained 1.7 strokes with the approach play. He's got to be cleaner off the tee. Did lose about a stroke in that category, which means he was spraying the ball. He hits the ball super long off the tee, so you would not expect him to be losing a bunch there. Worth noting, though, this kind of skipped my mind when we looked at him before, but he did hole out for eagle on 14, and that was one of the harder holes on the golf course. So that was probably like 160, 170 yard shot at least, maybe even closer to 180, 190 that he holed out at hole 14. If he made a 2 there, that was probably 2 of the shots gained on 1 shot alone. So stat wise, at Højgaard's like a 6 out of 10. He's still a little bit better than average, I would say, because him losing 4 strokes putting screams short game regression. So he would be another example of that, Akeem. See, is 5% enough to get over the field on Damon, or should that be closer to 20 if you think he can go off again? So yeah, if you're a believer in Joel Damon, it depends on the contest you're entering, because in large field GPPs, he's not going to be over 10%. So if you played 20%, you're going to be 2x leverage for sure. Now, in some GPPs, I put it this way, I'm going to have his ownership about 5% sites. 2 to 5% would be the ownership in most contests that you're going to see. But in some smaller GPPs, like single entries, like the 10 to like 100 entry contests, there are some GPPs where he's going to be like 15 to 20%. So I think it kind of depends. Like I would rather have you closer to 20 if you're comfortable getting to that, but at least 12 to 15% is what you want on Joel Damon. 3x the field is normally a good barometer for 6-7K range player. 2x is normally my barometer for like 9-10K guys, trying to get double the field when I can. But yeah, on further down the board, like you have on Joel, being more aggressive is typically a good idea, especially because I want to point out the ownership on Joel maybe getting spiked up in spots. If anyone's going to get that late steam, it's the guy that's -9. The guy that has the best form that went off today. In your case, right, you think he might be able to continue that the next day. There's going to be other people that think the same thing. So yeah, commit to him, I would say. He said deep dive on Echeverria. So yeah, let's look at his stat profile. I liked him in general this week. He did cash me out for a 3-ball plus 200 today, but a little short game dependent for my liking. He did still gain the 2 strokes on approach, but 2.5 putting. That's you can't expect that every day, even for a good putter like him. So tomorrow, maybe it's closer to 1.5 strokes. He could, get a little bit closer to the field there. And then the around the green being positive, that's, again, not something you can really count on for every single round. But if he's going to gain 2 strokes ball striking every day, he did slightly lose off the tee, but he gained over that 2.2 on approach, then he'll be just fine. Like he might not have a -7 nutted round every single day, but that ball striking makes up for it being a little bit short game dependent. So you'd have to give him like a 5.5, a 6 out of 10 stat profile, like still better than average because of that approach play in particular. But the reason why we don't have Echeverria as like a 7.5 plus on that scale is because of the short game being a little bit better than what we can count on. Like when you have somebody gaining like 3 strokes in the short game categories like we have here, you almost have to throw that out and go like, okay, what was he doing for us otherwise? It was solid otherwise. So I still think he's a decent play, but it takes away a lot of that positive. Let's put it that way. Let's see. Looking at a Norn deep dive for sure. So yeah, hell of a round for Norn today. Got to say, not normally a guy I use at Birdie Fest, so I was not expecting that. And he gained about 6 strokes in the short game category. So I would be highly skeptical of him doing that in back-to-back days. He could still go low tomorrow, but it's likely going to be because the ball striking is 9-day different. Today, he only gained about 0.4 strokes between the 2 categories. If he's going to shoot something like -5 or better, he's going to have to gain like 2 strokes ball striking at the very least. Like I could still see him gaining a couple strokes short game. Alex Noren is an elite tier player with the around the green and the putting at times, but gaining 6 strokes every single day, I mean, forget it, right? Nobody is going to continue that for an entire event. At the best, you might get 1 or 2 of those guys that do it in back-to-back rounds. There's always exceptions to the rule, but they are relatively rare. Doing it 3 days, hardly ever see it. Doing it 4 days, though, over the entire event, at least to my memory, I can't think of any player that's done that. So that's a little bit of a red flag in those 2 categories. Mac Meissner, he was one of your last punts out. He's a decent round 1, and you're looking at him as a potential play for tomorrow. Let's see. And you said, is he going to catch steam after his round today? I'm not sure I'd say he's going to catch steam just because he's so cheap. Like your guys like Joel Damon might be catching some steam. Not so sure with Mac Meissner, though. Yeah, like you said, gained ball striking, really solid performance across the board. Short game wasn't like he was playing over his head. If you had a lean on Meissner this week, you played him in main slate, and you're looking to go back in round 2, this stat profile isn't giving you any information to jump off ship, because at this point, he's doing it in a sustainable fashion. 3 shots gained in the 2 most important categories is going to be a lot better than the players around him. The only downside, and you already know this because you asked it in the question, is that he will be slightly higher owned than the guys around him. At least in my early runner projections, I still have to make quite a few adjustments based on that first set, but I can't see him being over, let's say, 3, maybe 4% owned at the very most in large field GPPs. So as long as you're taking them in, let's say 10% of lineups at the very least, that's 2.5x leverage to that 4% mark, then you'd be okay doing that. So I'm okay with it on Meissner, especially with that kind of stat profile. But just like with Damon, keep in mind that he is going to get played maybe more than you'd think. You said you think that Griffin was responding to the question about why he didn't use driver. Yeah, maybe that explains it. It's I don't know. Golfers love to blame conditions when they can, and yeah, it's just life, right? We never really want to blame ourselves when we make mistakes. We want to find any reason possible to blame it on something else. It's just a kind of human nature. Is it galaxy braining to look at the average round scoring? You've never mentioned that stat. So yeah, you said the question came from you looking at Novak. I kind of hinted at this one before. Maybe you're just joining us, but I will talk about it again. Because I don't look at the average round scoring. So like for round 2, round 3, I do look at round 4 average scoring because there's something to the narrative. I'm not somebody that will ever just blindly play narratives. Like I know we had the jet lag theory at the 3M. This week, we've got the top 70 bubble. I've heard podcasts kind of expand on that. I think it's all mumbo jumbo. I think it's BS, frankly, like 99% of the time. I don't subscribe to any of those theories. And the round by round stuff is one of those to me. Like round 2, round 3, this is just my take on it. People swear by it, though. So I always mention this asterisk because, hey, it doesn't help me out, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't help other people out. I just don't think people wake up on Friday and think that they're going to play better golf. Now, I have heard the theory that maybe with the cut line pressure, it helps people out on Fridays. I guess I could see that. And then with Saturday, you could say like moving day pins being aggressive, like some people do that well. I personally don't subscribe to that, but there's some potential value, I would say. It's just yeah, you can tell my take on it. I just think it's a little bit of mumbo jumbo. He said, appreciate the content. Keep up the great work. I appreciate you, Steve. Thanks for the kind words. And can we do a deep dive on Chris Kirk? We absolutely can. He was another ball striking popper that played surprisingly well today. 3.5 strokes approach, gained off the tee, then lost 2 strokes putting. This is another like 7.5, 8 out of 10 stat profile. It's hell, it might even be better than that. It might even be closer to like a 9 out of 10 stat profile, at least based on round number 1. But keep in mind that it is only an 18-hole sample size. And I guess just for full transparency's sake, he's going to get some ownership. It's Chris Kirk. He's not always the most aggressive player. Like he's not a high birdie percentage guy on tour. I'm considering using Kirk in my lineups for round number 2, but he's one of the guys that even with this kind of a stat profile that's setting up well, I'm a little bit sketched out about. Like I said, the shots gain metrics aren't the end all be all. We sometimes have to use reasoning and just kind of our brain sometimes with these plays as well. Kirk, it's not so much of a problem, but like the Higo one before, like that's one where like, I'm not sure I'm going to be getting there myself because you got to remember who we're dealing with. It's he's made me a lot of money, but he has sucked for a long time at this point. Let's tie it all together with a little bit of strategy. So contest-wise, we're not going to go through all the contests that are available because we've done it 1,000 times at this point. I think we've gone a little bit repetitive with that section. But if you guys haven't already seen that, play in sustainable contest. You don't want to be playing in GPPs that are 30% to first place. What I mean by that is if you click contest details, if you take the ratio of first place to the total prize pool, you want it to be 20% or less. So the big $25 GPP, which is a 141 max entry, kind of weird. That's not 150 max, but I guess they're changing it up on us for whatever reason. But 20% is doable. It's stomachable. Ideally, we want close to 10% to first place. So whether it's single entries, large field GPPs, you name it, the less percentage that they're giving for the first prize payout, the better and the easier long-term it's going to be profitable. And the reason for that is it's just hard to win GPPs. And you're playing against like 20,000 entries, 5,000 entries, you name it, whatever the size of the contest might be. it's hard to win first place. Like, you have to have a perfect lineup most times to have any chance of being able to take that down. So if you're only entering a couple lineups per slate, let's say you're not entering all 141 like you can in this contest, then you gotta know in the back of your mind that even if you have a really good lineup, you might not be winning first place. Like, you could have 4 or 5 perfect plays in your lineup, but unless all 6 of them are the absolute nuts, there's a chance that you're finishing in 3rd, 4th place. And in a contest that's 30% to first, well, that 3rd, 4th place isn't going to mean nearly as much as opposed to a contest where it's only 10% to first, and they've got all the extra percentage of the pool to pay out to the rest of the top 5. So that's why I'm so adamant on it. If you want to enter in the large GPPs, the ones that are super top heavy, that are like 30% to first, just know what you're getting yourself into. Those contests you should be playing to finish in first place or to finish in last. And in like a big large field GPP that has that payout structure, that's how I play it. I play it like Ricky Bobby does. I play it like Dale Earnhardt Jr., right? The GOATs. Praise Dale, as they say down here in the South. But like, you go for first, right? You take every corner aggressively in those large field GPPs, because finishing in 5th in those means nothing. Like, it has little to no impact in your long-term ROI. So make sure you're entering the right sort of contest, just the PSA for the slate. But putting it together strategy-wise, we just want to make sure that we're getting enough leverage into our lineups. And I mentioned the weather before. By single entry, a lot of my GPP lineups, I could be leaning into that weather edge as well, right? Trying to make sure we're only taking guys on the right side of the draw. And in fact, let's do that here together. So I'm going to bring up the PGA Tour website just so I can take a look at the tee times, make sure we're not playing anyone from the wrong side of the draw. And let's build a lineup together and show you that process. So let's go to tee times. Let's make sure it's on round 2, and it is. And let's try and find some lower owned diamonds in the rough. So Keegan Bradley, I'm 90% sure is on the right side of the draw, but let's double check on that. So yeah, he's going off at 7:30. Let's throw him in there. He's not going to be low owned at the top, but maybe lower owned than some of the guys around him. Let's actually refresh this. I want to get all the live scoring on there too, so I can see exactly where maybe some of this ownership is going to come in. So let's do that. Let me make sure I didn't screw up the stream by doing that. Okay, yeah, we're good. I wanted to make sure me refreshing my entire browser didn't screw that up. Let's go with Bradley towards the top, and let's find another AM guy to mix in. Spieth is PM, so that's a no-go. Jake Knapp, again, not sure if he withdrew or not. Somebody was saying that, but we'll see. Let's see Glover, right? Glover should be AM as well. Yes, so let's throw him into the lineup. Glover, by the way, has really good course history. Keegan Bradley is just a high pedigree, high projection play. Not sure if he's going to make his way into my player pool or not, but Glover almost certainly is going to make his way into some of my lineups. You get thrown in Denny McCarthy. McCarthy's also going to be an AM wave player. He's a course history guy, $8,300. And with our first 3 players, notice that I wasn't talking about the ownership really. I was kind of just like playing my guys, trying to get guys on the right side of the draw, since that's what we're doing with this kind of a lineup. But our last 3 players now, after we've moved on from the 9, 10, and 8K range, we're going to have to consider the ownership. That's where, especially because we're building this lineup for like the big $5 or $25 GPP, this is where we're going to get our differentiation to the field, make sure that when our players hit, they can move up those leaderboards, but also where we're going to make sure we're not going to duplicate ourselves with other lineups. So we might want to consider leaving salary on the table. If we need to add in a little bit of extra uniqueness, make sure even more so that we're not going to have the same lineup, or just really take low-owned plays here. So let me look at Luke Clanton's tee time. That's an interesting one to me. Is he AM wave? He is, and he makes a shit ton of birdies. Don't have to twist my arm too much for me to play my bro, somebody that I play golf with regularly. So let's throw him into the lineup. Let's see, when is Quaven? I think Quaven's PM. Quaven cannot make a putt today, but he's a really good putter. Yeah, unfortunately, PM wave. So for the sake of this correlated lineup, maybe isn't the best option. Let's see. A lot of these guys are on the wrong side of the draw, just from my memory. I know Fox isn't. So I guess we could, again, these aren't all players that I'm necessarily going to be using in my player pool, but Foxy would be average to maybe below average ownership. And then with our last man in here, because we've been intentional with the Clanton should be like sub 6-7%. Fox is maybe average to slightly below average ownership. If we threw in somebody that was low owned as our last man in, like a Novak, for example, he looks like the quote unquote lowest owned player at $7,300. You probably get away with it in the big $5 or $25. But if you threw him in there as your last man in, you might be skating on thin ice with that one. I would be a little bit sketched out to play that myself. But if you left, let's say $200 on the table, and we went down here to $7,100, and let's say we threw in, I don't know, let's see, a Matthias Schmid, let's say at $7,000, leaving a whole $300 on the table. Actually, if you left the $300 on the table and you made sure to take a relatively low-owned player, then not only are you going to for sure not duplicate yourself. I mean, if you did, it would be a fluke of all flukes. It's a very low percentage dupe when you're leaving salary on the table and you have 3 pivots in the lineup, but it also gives you some lineup differentiation. It gives you a chance to actually move up the leaderboards when your players hit, because Matthias Schmid, probably sub 5% owned, I'd imagine. And by the way, the reason why I'm considering him is he makes a shit ton of birdies. He's in the top 20 on tour and birdie or better percentage. You talked through that with Clanton, right? Clanton makes a whole lot of birdies. Some of them are course history players that we're mixing in before. Have that rhyme and reason for all the guys that you're getting to. And let me just double check. Yeah, Fox should be AM. I know that one. Let me look at Schmid. That's the one that I guess we should double check. And yeah, we're not building a whole lineup because DraftKings frowns upon that. So I guess it doesn't matter if Schmid was in the AM wave or not. But yeah, for your last man in, Schmid is PM. So I guess you wouldn't want to use him if you're doing that kind of stacked lineup. But find an AM guy, maybe leave a couple $100 on the table and find somebody that's not the chalk on that side of the tee times, and you'd be totally fine in those large field contests. So in fact, let's look at Steven Yeager. Is he an AM wave? I think he was. Let's double check. Yeager's PM, damn it. If he was AM, that'd be perfect for that. Let's see what Eckroat is. Eckroat hit the ball decently today. I think he's a short game regression candidate, if memory serves me correctly. And he's also a PM wave, unfortunately. So still some PM guys I'll be playing. By the way, I'm going to have lineups that are 5-1s in my 150 max. So it's not like I'm completely against throwing one of those guys in as my last man in. But we were trying to correlate this for a reason, right? That was kind of the idea when coming into building this lineup. Like we could go Hubbard, but Hubbard's going to be chalk. And he's on the right side of the draw, but his ownership's going to be exponentially higher than some of these other pivots we could take. I think Lipsky's on the right side of the draw. He might be one of the few guys in that tier of the pricing. Yeah, he's going off at 8:18 a.m. Yeah, maybe you round this off with Lipsky. You leave the $300 on the table and you find your third pivot to mix into this lineup. 3 pivots is usually a good spot for those large field GPPs. If you're in a single entry or even just a smaller GPP, so something that's rather than 5 to 10,000 entries, closer to, let's say, a couple hundred to maybe 500 entries that you're playing against. If that's the case, maybe you only need 2 pivots in your set of 6 players, but you need some differentiation to move up these leaderboards at the end of the day. So that's the lineup construction. That's what you should be thinking about when building your lineups. You can use that weather edge. I think it's going to be there in at least some capacity for tomorrow, but you don't have to do it in every single build. I think 5-1s, 4-2s are more inviolable. And hell, even if you have some 3-3s that you really like, I'm not against that either. Like, I'm probably going to have some 3-3s. Hell, I might even have a 4-2 in the opposite direction in a couple cases in my large field GPP exposure. Now, I wouldn't be going like 4 PM guys if I was playing in a single entry in a higher dollar contest, that kind of thing. But when the edge is looking like it's going to be at most like a stroke difference, I think it's going to be less than what it was today. It was, let's see, at the end of the round, it got to about a 0.9 stroke difference between the 2 waves. If I had to guess right now, I'd probably have it at about 0.75 strokes. The only way I think it stays the same is if that storm comes through that we were talking about before. So don't be shy to add in a few guys on the wrong side of the draw. Just, I would say, add in some correlated exposure as well. Anytime there's a chance that we get that entire stroke advantage again, you in some capacity want to have some exposure there. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck for all of your exposure for the next round. I'll go over any last second questions that you got for me in the chat. But other than that, I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs, your logos trying to take down some contests alongside me. For all of my content, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. My projections will be posted for my members in about 30 minutes over there. To join that, you guys can find a link on my X/Twitter. That is GSLukeDFS. In my bio, there's a link to join my Patreon page. On there, I've got my player poll, also all my projections. So check that out if you guys haven't already. And also make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation website tonight because they're going to have the stone on there as well. So great resource, especially because they have things like the round 2, round 3 historical on there. The stone that really helps out with going through your shots gained research. All of that, make sure to check out on their website later on as well. But let's see if there's any last second comments to go through. And I'll see you guys for the round 3 content tomorrow. Let's see. Dive on Michael Kim. So yeah, let's go through the Michael Kim deep dive. So didn't really see that much in him today. So let's see. He gained off the tee, lost on approach, and then lost around the green and gained with the putter. So kind of was all over the place. That's why he wasn't popping in a lot of the research that I was doing. And the deep dive from the stat perspective really doesn't teach us that much. I mean, if we were really trying to dive into it, I guess it's nice that he gained ball striking, but him gaining 2 strokes putting is also, it's not a massive red flag, but it's a tiny red flag too. So it's like a 5 out of 10 stat profile. There's not much to say, I would say, on good old Michael Kim. He said, you do remember saying that now. All good, Chris. Yeah, sometimes thoughts skip the brain. It happens to everyone, of course. You're looking at Poston tomorrow and Andrew Novak. It seems like their prices are too cheap. Maybe even fitting in a Fox and Homa with them as well. Poston, I'm with you on, man. Poston was a core play for me this week. Really sets up well at this course. And I believe he's AM wave, so he checks that box from the weather perspective. Andrew Novak as well. So, yeah, no pushback on those two, especially because Novak shouldn't be chalky. Poston as well. Like he played decent golf, not great golf. So it's not like he's going to be way above average ownership. I'm okay with those two. And then he said Fox and Homa. Yeah, the Homa shots gain stats with the ball striking can't get better than that. So not going to give you too much pushback there. You said you played somebody named Thor Bjornsson. Do I think he'll make the cut? Oof. Yeah, it's a tough play, my dude. Let's see. Where is he at? Where did he finish the round? He's plus or -1. Based on your comment, I thought he was going to be like +2, +3 or something. -1 for sure he could make the cut. I mean, he's 1 stroke off the current cut line. So yeah, enough said there, man. He just needs to have a better than average round. He can make it for you. And let's look at McCarty. Yeah, McCarty is not a guy that was really popping for me either, at least in a lot of my research. Let's add in the extra C so he actually shows up. But he gained across all 4 stat categories. So the reason why this kind of guy doesn't quote unquote pop in your shots gained analysis is because everything is close to a neutral, but this kind of stat profile where you're good across the board, you didn't have any weakness, is also pretty favorable. So I'd say 6.5 out of 10 stat profile. It's very sustainable, right? Like there wasn't one category where he gained 5 strokes approach. There wasn't like he gained 5 strokes short game where you're like, oh crap, like is he gonna be able to do that the next day? Yeah, he could for sure gain across the 4 stat categories again. So yeah, 6.5 out of 10. And I had him in my player pool because of his high upside nature. I was already looking at him because he's a top 50 birdie maker on tour. Yet on top of that kind of consistent shots gained profile. And yeah, I could see myself getting there myself. But that's all I've got, guys. Appreciate your support on the channel as per usual. Prop and betting live stream will be later tonight on my YouTube channel. It'll be at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure to check that out for all of the underdog and prize pick stuff for round number 2, as well as for any matchups on the sports books. But that's all for now. Appreciate you guys. And I'll see you guys for the round 3 live stream tomorrow night.